Welcome back to the Better Divorce Podcast, where we untangle the emotional, financial, legal, and emotional turmoil and human realities of all things divorce, and help you rebuild your life that feels aligned, authentic, and truly yours. Because you know what? It is. Today's conversation is for anyone standing in the ashes of once was and wondering, what do I do now? Who am I now? I'm joined by Ashley Jablow, founder of Wayfinders Collective and the creator of the Life Design School. I love that name. A creative studio helping people navigate career and life transitions with clarity, courage, and intention. Ashley blends design thinking, emotional intelligence, innovation, strategy, creativity, and reflective practice to help people stop surviving change and start designing what comes next. She's also the artist and author behind 100 Days of Designing My Life. Isn't that a great title? And creator of the Little Deck of Sweet Reflections, tools that invite people back to themselves during seasons of uncertainty and reinvention. And if there's one thing divorce demands, it's reinvention. Because divorce is not the ending of a relationship, in my opinion. It's often the unraveling of an identity, routine, future plans, the confidence you have, and a version of yourself you thought you were supposed to be. Something new is upon the horizon. You just might not know it yet. Today, Ashley and I are talking about what it means to consciously rebuild your life after loss, not after just panic, fear, and survival mode, but from vision, creativity, self-trust, and possibility. So let's start a little bit of your story. What makes you want to do this work? I'm really curious. What's your story?
Oh, I love that, Paulette. Thank you for having me. And I'm just sitting here nodding and smiling as you're talking about authenticity and meaning and self-identity and self-trust. This is like, if I imagine jumping into the most perfectly temperatured pool, right? Like this is the water I want to swim in. So I'm really glad to be here with you today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
My story is very much a young woman, high achiever, in parentheses, perfectionist, who always wanted to reach for the most ambitious, most kind of successful career and life that I could create for myself. Some of that was very much just who I am, and some of that was I now see very much as the cultural and social conditioning of where I grew up. I grew up in Silicon Valley, in Palo Alto, California. My grandfather was one of the first employees at Hewlett Packard. So this notion of creativity and innovation in many ways kind of runs through my veins. And I grew up really being told both directly and implicitly that if I didn't want to become the first woman president of the United States and cure cancer at the same time, well, then there was something wrong with me. So I have always been a striver. I've always been an achiever. And in many ways, that wish for myself has panned out. I've worked in some really incredible organizations in innovation, in design thinking, in the federal government, in the private sector. And it all came to a really screeching halt a number of years ago when I unexpectedly got laid off from my dream job. And, it's not the same thing, of course, as a divorce. And also that kind of loss and grief and the need to rewrite your self-understanding, not to mention how to explain the story of what has happened. That was like my, what is it? Like a baptism by fire, right? And so in many ways, that moment, it was so difficult and really just, heartbreaking in many ways. I also knew at that moment that I had been given a gift. I'd been given an opportunity to really stop and consider the direction of my life and be very honest with myself that I wasn't actually going in the direction I wanted to be headed in. And so through many, many Gosh, many honest conversation, lots of reflection, lots of support, and creative experimentation. I started my business, and a number of years later, I now not just have a career that I love that truly is authentic to me, but I've built a life for myself that really feels like mine. It's such a gift, and it's even a greater gift now to get to support my clients to do that same thing.
Beautiful. And I'm nodding too when if you're listening to the audio, but I am nodding. I can relate to so much of that, and I feel like I had a very similar epiphany. It was not being fired from my job, it was quitting my job. And I had an umbilical hernia, and I didn't even know what an umbilical hernia was, let alone the fact that I had one. But I had three children really close together. I had three children in 4 years, and let's just say my umbilical seam right in the middle didn't fuse back together. So I'm at the doctor, and he says, "You've got a hernia, and we need to do surgery really fast." And I was like, "The hell's a hernia?" I'd never known anyone with one. So anyway, so we scheduled it, and it was September, and I had the surgery September. And he told me when I left, the surgeon, after I left, with this massive Band-Aid on my whole abdominal, like from my rib cage down to my hip bones. "Don't bend forward, don't bend back, don't twist right or left, don't pick up anything," and basically sit on the couch and, do nothing for 6 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
Well, this is a woman who taught ballet, jazz, tap, point, hip hop, musical theater. I didn't know what the heck that meant, and I had three little kids, and I had this big house to take care of and a long commute, and I looked at him like, yeah, sure. But it hurt so much that I really didn't have a choice. I remember kind of walking around like I was in a straitjacket, so that forced me to sit on the couch for 6 weeks, or lay down, and kind of roll over to get up. It forced me to think about my career and my life. And I'm now 37 years old, and I'd never taken a moment to think about that. So, whether it's getting laid off, or fired, or having surgery, or whatever your moment is, there's usually some sort of tipping point or breaking point. You said beautifully that it was some sort of gift, and I can relate to that so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that it's adversity that often is what, accelerates or even kicks off this kind of reinvention. But I really believe that, and it's funny. So I really believe that alignment, or maybe we could say misalignment, is a clue. Even before adversity comes along, right? That sense of misalignment is something I always try to pay attention to myself. And certainly with a health crisis, you may not notice that sense of misalignment, right? But when it's out in your environment, whether it's your relationships or it's your job or, your surroundings, paying attention to that, like something doesn't feel right,
Yeah.
there's often that kind of clue. And in hindsight, there were so many clues that this job actually wasn't the right job for me, and that this team wasn't the right team for me. I often actually think about it much like a breakup. There was that honeymoon phase of like, oh, they like me, I like them, we're having so much fun. And then there was sort of this, like, I think of it like leaving the dishes in the sink phase, like, well, they're not perfect, but I still really care about them. And then at some point, I got dumped, right? And I suppose if I had been more tuned into that misalignment earlier, I might have seen it coming. I don't know, but I do think that sense of like, there's something that's not right here is often your first clue.
Yeah. I am a big fan of David Byrne and Talking Heads, and there is a wonderful song that he wrote called Once in a Lifetime. Not sure if you're old enough to know what the heck I'm talking about, but
I do
and
know it.
the lyrics are profoundly life-changing, where you as he says, and he doesn't sing at the beginning, he speaks to you, and you may find yourself, and
Yeah.
then he asks the question, well, how did I get here?
Yep.
And then later in the song, he does sing a little bit with the chorus, and same as it ever was, same as it ever was, and he says that a lot. So if you don't know the song, everyone, listen to Talking Heads, David Byrne sing Once in a Lifetime, or speak it. And that epiphany, and I remember that song came on the radio as I was crossing the street to get to the mail at our house. The mailbox happened to have been on the other side of the street. It was a main road, so you had to look right and left a few times not to get killed. Sometimes they come around the corner real fast. And I was the one to blare the radio because I was a dance teacher, right? So what do dance teachers do? We listen to music really loud. And it was the 90s, early 2000s. So kind of grunge rock and, the time of like angry music, Alanis Morissette, and anyway, so every now and then I'd listen to like the oldies station because this song came out in 1980. And the song came on, and as I'm turning around looking at my beautiful house, and he says, this isn't your beautiful house or my beautiful house. This isn't my beautiful wife. How did I get here? And the tears just flowed. And that was the moment I said, yeah, that was my moment. Everyone has a moment. Yeah, that was just the
Wow.
beginning, and here I am 20 years later. Well, and I was in high school when that song came out. And I remember it's a very kind of like, and the music was different in the 80s, I grew up with the B-52s and Devo and the Police and the Cards and all that type of music. And he had this, he's from Rhode Island, but was born in Scotland. And it's just, he's got a very interesting story. If you watch the documentary, I guess, about his concert, it's called Stop Making Sense. He's still singing at the age of, I think, 70 something, or maybe he's in even 80. But regardless about the music, whatever your epiphany is, or I like to call it the tipping point, what is that tipping point that you say, I don't know if I can do this anymore? Yeah.
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 Yeah. I guess I'm curious, Paulette, as I'm learning about your story, when you had that epiphany and you said, I don't think I can do this anymore. Or, how did I get here? Right. To quote David Byrne.
Yeah.
What did you do with that question? Like very practically, you had that thought, and what happened next?
I found yoga. Yeah. I had been a dancer my whole life and very, used to using my body to express myself through choreography. I'd choreographed over 350 original pieces of choreography. So I'd find music, I'd find inspiration, like, Any Dream Will Do from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and Christina Aguilera, Janet Jackson, I would choreograph, Rhythm Nation, you name it. This was the sign of the times, right? But every now and then there'd be a song that like Jewel Hands, where she says, these hands are mine, they're small, but that's all I have. It's I would always find choreography a way of non-verbally communicating. And when I left the dance world, that took me a while to get the courage to do that. I felt like my body was sort of a vessel that hadn't been explored, because from dancer's point of view, everything's about, the tights, the tutu, the rhinestone tiara, being perfect, the show must go on, never let them see you sweat, be a trooper, blisters, it's just a blister, a pulled hamstring, whatever, get over it, you just suffer through the pain. And yoga's kind of the opposite, but I stumbled upon a yoga class when I dropped my son off at preschool, and they were all laying on the floor. And it was like in a separate room. I didn't walk over them or anything, but I was walking down the hall and I dropped him off, and I looked down the hall and there were like, I don't know, 15, 16 people laying on the ground, and I'm thinking, why are they so damn happy? Like, what? I want that. Like when Harry met Sally and she goes,
Yeah.
I want what she's having. I was saying, I want what they're having. So I said, hey, what are they doing? And her name was Keisha Bacon. I remember. How could I forget the name Bacon? So I went and I went, I love this. And then I met Paige Railsback, and then I did, studied yoga at every yoga studio within a I don't know, 20-mile radius of my home. And then I did my 200-hour, my 300-hour, my 500-hour registered teacher training. And then I did another 200, another 500. And I started my own registered yoga school where I became a yoga teacher trainer. I would train practitioners and teachers to own and open studios because I'd had a lot of experience in running successful studios. And then I wrote a curriculum. And then I was recruited to be at a resort to direct the spa and studio down in San Pedro, Ambergris Key, Belize for 3 years. And so you never know what's gonna, but yeah, I'm a constant learner. I met Rod Stryker at the Kripalu Institute, read his book, The Four Desires, became the Four Desires certified teacher, and have changed lives. I figured if I could change my life, and I can help other people change theirs. So, and then of course the divorce came, 10 years of that nightmare. And people started reaching out to me for help, because they knew me from ballet, and I was the director of the children's division of Ford Models, and I had become a birth doula. Again, reinventing myself time and time again. You never, as soon as you stop learning, right, Ashley? Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. Well, and what I love that I hear in your story that I experience in my own life and I see with my coaching clients is that it's always one thing that leads you to the next, which then leads you to the next, and so on and so on. Yeah. I'm very close with my mom, and my mom's, like, one of my mom's favorite kind of go-to pieces of advice has always been, Ashley, you've got to get on the bus. You can always change your seat later. Mm-hmm. And the idea that, like, not only do you have to get moving, right? But once you're in motion, your vantage point changes, right? Yeah. Your perspective changes. You can see the landscape more clearly. Mm-hmm. So I'm always fascinated by this kind of like dance between the reflection that's required to know yourself and know that you're out of alignment and know that you desire something more or better or different, paired with the fact that clarity comes through action. It comes through making a small step forward and learning from it, seeing what happens next, and then continuing on. Right? I just think to me, it feels like a dance. I'm not a dancer like you, but this notion of the back and forth, the swaying between reflection and action is something that I'm just constantly fascinated by, and I see in my own life just play out all the time.
Well, I don't want to paint a rosy, unrealistic picture of just, flipping a switch by any means. It did take quite some time. I had a husband, 3 children, a family, a business, a lot of responsibility, hundreds of students to mentor as well as teach. So it did take a lot of soul searching, as they say, to get to that place. And it also was a 3 to 4 year period between leaving career A behind and stepping into what I thought might be another new chapter of what I call treading water. I was just sort of living in ambivalence, a little limbo, where I kind of was, as Eleanor Roosevelt says, dwell in the possibility. I was okay not knowing the answer to the question. There's a wonderful quote by Maria Rainer, I think I said it backwards, Maria Rainer. It's a 3-word name. Anyway, and it says something, I beg you to have patience with the unanswered questions, as if they were, languages you don't speak, or locked in rooms you don't have the key to. And there's another analogy, it's a long poem, that someday, without you even knowing it, you'll live your way into the answer. It's a long quote, but I kind of butchered it, but that's the gist of it. And I remember reading that going, yeah, patience. That's something I didn't have. I wanted an Oompa Loompa now. I wanted instant gratification. I was very, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
yes,
right?
Course,
Veruca, that little snot-nosed, purple girl that was like, Daddy, I want an Oompa Loompa now.
Yes,
I felt like that, I was so impatient. I'm a perfectionist too, Ashley. So yeah, I don't just do something well. I have to do it perfectly, right? So my bed is always made. The house is always clean. The refrigerator's color coded. Like my pantry, people freak out when they walk into it. I'm just a very organized person. I don't even know I'm doing it, but back to Veruca. I felt this sense of like, I want it now. Like, why do I have to wait? But it was the first time that I was okay, really, truly all right, not knowing.
Yeah.
It felt uncomfortable and I didn't like it. It was uneasy feeling, but I was saying, you know what? This is okay. I really don't know. And that transition is what's so hard about divorce. It's that often divorce or a major life transition, that's the debate. There's it's that rebuilding of your identity that is the confusing, overwhelming, troubling part. And this is something so many women struggle with after divorce, especially after years of people pleasing, caregiving, and emotionally surviving high conflict relationships, right? So maybe with your expertise, how can these people design thinking and reflective practices help someone kind of rediscover who they are after the marriage ends? Because that identification of wife, mother, daughter-in-law, sister-in-law, it just kind of blows up in your face, right? That transition is the beginning of a new identity.
Oh, absolutely. So I have lots of thoughts, but I just have to share the image that I often think about when I think about transition of any kind. To your point of like, I just want it now, right? From one high achiever maybe to another. I grew up doing a lot of ropes courses. That's a tongue twister. Ropes courses, for team building, like student government, trust falls kind of thing, right? And you would go and you'd be standing on one platform with a harness, like high up in the air, on a tree, and you'd be looking across the way to see another tree where you were going to swing from one platform to another. And that's the same kind of image that we often have for life change of any kind, right? I'm here and I want to get to here. And everything will be better once I've planted my feet on that other platform across the way.
Right.
Now, I hate heights. I'm not a risk taker in that way. So for me, the pressure, the urgency to swing as quickly as possible was really, really high. And what I learned from doing so many of those is that once your feet are on the ground, once the swing from one platform to another is over, it's actually the feeling of the wind in your hair, the shrieking, the laughing, the actual swinging that you remember and you tell people about, and that changes you, right? It's actually swinging from where you are to where you want to get to, right? Transitioning. That is actually kind of the whole point. And I think that that's really true, again, for a high ropes course, but also for any kind of life change. It's the swinging from one place to another that gives you the time and the space and the learning and the breathing room, right? To patiently see these kinds of questions through, to patiently explore and, yes, sit in the uncertainty of not knowing, but also getting to be really curious about who am I and where am I going, and starting to imagine, well, what does that future look like, right? So I just really want to first start by encouraging anyone who's feeling like I'm standing on one platform and I just want to get to the other one, to know that once you're at the other spot, it's all the work, it's all the learning, it's all the shrieking, right, in the midair that actually is going to be the story that you tell people.
Yeah. Most people ask me, well, like, how have you changed your life so much? How did you do that? How did you find the courage, or what was the impetus? And, part of that is just my demeanor, I think, and my DNA. And as my Yiddish, with growing up in Boston, all my friends being Jewish and my father's best friends, chutzpah. And there isn't an American English word that means that. So guts, resilience, courage, strength, fortitude, chutzpah. It's such a great word, right?
It is.
It's just guts. It's not an easy thing to know that I deserve more, I deserve better, I need to create that. So yeah, everyone has their moment, right? But yeah, I do remember that liberating feeling when I had given my mother back the keys to the studio, because it was her ballet studio, and said, I all the teachers are lined up, all the classes are covered. I gave you my 2 years notice. I'm going to go home and raise my kids now. And I love you. Thank you for teaching me how to be a great dancer, a great dance teacher. But after 20 years of dedicating my life to this business, I'm done. And getting in the car, it was agonizing, because I was risked it all. But I had to choose me over, a life that felt dead. And it wasn't easy. But so you call this life design. So how can it help someone starting over after divorce? What is life design? Because at Better Divorce Academy, we help people move from confusion to confusion, I call it. Sorry, confusion to conclusion. I said it backwards, but you get the gist. Conclusion to confusion. That would be bad. But from confusion to conclusion, because that's just what it is, there's so much. But your work also focuses on intentional reinvention. So can you explain what life design actually means, and how someone in emotional turmoil or overwhelm can begin creating that future? Because they don't know what to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think of life design as a really creative, curious, and intentional approach to creating a life that is authentic and aligned with who you really are. And there are four, I think of them as steps, although they don't necessarily need to be done in order. But there are four kind of buckets that I believe make up life design and the experience of designing a life that you love. The first one, for sure, that I would start with for anyone who is really just beginning to pick their head up and look around and say, again, like, how did I get here, is discovery. So discovery really is about taking a pause and reflecting on who am I today. Now that can feel like a really big question, and it is, right? But often, we change all the time, and the story of who we are in our mind doesn't always get updated, right? So when you are in midlife, in mid-career, in the midst of a big transition or life change, it's really important that you pause and get curious about who you are today. What are your values? What lights you up? What are you curious about? So really asking yourself questions about yourself, right? I think is, again, that point about reflection. It's so important as a foundation to then, you have to know yourself in order to be able to design something that's meaningful to you, right? The second area to look at is what I call define. And define builds on all that reflection that you did in discovery, and it gives you the opportunity to really discern and name, what are my priorities? What does success look like? What are my non-negotiables, and what am I willing to adjust, right? In a job context, of course, that often looks like, this is what good looks like for a job. But it might be, coming out of a relationship, it might be, how do I want to feel every day? How do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to spend my time? What matters to me? Right? How do I want to spend my money even? So really naming and defining what matters to you at this point in your life. The third step is imagine. Now it's interesting because, and I have a feeling you know this, Paulette, but many of us skip over imagination when we are problem solving, right? We often go straight from problem to solution without stopping to consider, well, if I could wave a magic wand, what would I like to create for myself?
Oh, I
Right?
ask my clients all that in mediation. I love that. Yeah.
Yes, right. But I don't know. It's sort of like, we lose our connection to our imagination when we're really young, often, right? That's indulgent. It's selfish. It's maybe even reckless to stop and consider, like, if I could do anything, what would it be? But I think it's really important to actually pause and say, what do I want for my life? What is my vivid vision for the next year, for the next 5 years, the next 10 years? And then the last step, and this is where clarity comes and learning comes, is what I call iterate. And iterate is about taking very small, consistent action every day, regularly, to move yourself forward. So in the language of design and innovation, we might talk about prototyping or experimenting. What I like to ask people to consider is, what is the smallest, fastest, cheapest thing that you could do or try right now to learn about where you're going, right? And then once you've tried that, what could you try next based on what you learn? So those 4 steps together make up this concept of life design. And I've seen it in my own life, and I see it with the women I work with. When you're covering those bases, so to speak, it's almost inevitable that you will get to a place where your life feels more like your own.
Yeah. I always say it feels like you're wearing your shoes and not someone else's.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, or brushing your teeth with someone else's toothbrush
Oh,
versus. I know it's a disgusting analogy, but you know that feeling, like, if you, I used to always get out of a yoga class, there'd be 50 black thongs or flip-flops, as we call them now, right? When I was growing up, they were called thongs, but no, that not the underwear thong, but the one you put on your toes. And they're all the same. There's, I don't know, 50 pairs of flip-flops out there, and you think, and you accidentally put on the wrong pair, and you can immediately feel that they're not yours. Like, they don't mold it, they're not shaped to your foot, right? Even though maybe they're the same brand or even the same size, but they just don't feel right. And how many people live a life of wearing someone else's shoes that's uncomfortable? They're just like, or you buy shoes and they hurt, and you're like, ow, these really hurt, but we wear them anyway, right? Until you get home and you go, oh, I'm never wearing these shoes again. But or that toothbrush analogy. If you go on vacation or you forget to pack your toothbrush, you'd almost rather not brush your teeth that night than use someone else's. It's kind of the first thing you do is run out and go to the store and buy a new toothbrush, or ask them at the front desk, the concierge, is there any chance you have a toothbrush, right? You're calling. But the point is, like, it's that feeling of living someone else's life, right? Or wearing clothes that don't fit, or dare I say, brushing your teeth with someone else's toothbrush. But if you do that every single day, your life feels painful, right? Yeah. I'm dying to know more about this journal, 100 Days of Designing My Life. So what does it look like? Is it 100 pages of prompts, or, can you paint us a picture of what that looks like? Because I'm sure many people listening would benefit from having it.
Absolutely. Yes. So in my own life design journey, one of the biggest surprises, I suppose, is that I'm an artist. I've always thought of myself as a creative person.
Okay.
But I will acknowledge my mom is the artist in the family. She takes that position. So it's taken me 40 years or so to get into I am also an artist. Now, this connects to the journals because in 2020, when COVID hit, as it was for all of us, my life turned upside down. And for whatever reason, the only thing that seemed to make sense in a sea of questions and uncertainty was pulling out my paintbrushes. Go figure. And so I started an art project that I called 100 Days of Designing My Life. And it was a series of 100 watercolor postcards, maybe 3x5 cards, that had different visuals attached to them. So they were innovation frameworks, coaching methods, quotes that I loved, even visuals that I'd been kind of floating around in my own head. And although I was meant to do the project, one piece of art for 100 days, in the end, it took me 2 years to complete all 100, but I did. And to our earlier point about sometimes you just are in that season of pausing and waiting for clarity, I waited another 2 years before I realized that what I wanted to do, quote unquote, do with this art was to transform it into a reflection practice for people to design their lives, or at least begin that process through creative reflection. And so 100 Days of Designing My Life, the reflection journal, is actually 4 mini journals where each one contains 25 of my original pieces of art, alongside a short narrative and a number of reflection questions about that artwork piece. So the first, it won't be surprising, the first journal is called Discover, the second is Define, the third is Imagine, and the fourth is Iterate. And it's a really beautiful and I want to say gentle way to step into a reflection practice, because often people will say, oh, I'm not a journaler, or I don't know how to do that. But there's no right or wrong way to use these journals. So some people will commit and say, I'm going to do 1 page a day for 100 days. Other people might say, you know what, I really want to tap into my imagination. I'm going to start with Imagine, and I'm going to just open the book and see what comes to me for that day. There are no right or wrong ways to use it. I like to say I'm not giving out grades or gold stars, but the idea is that it's an easier and, again, gentler way to begin exploring these life design questions in a safe space where you don't have to share your answers with anyone. You can just allow your honest voice to come through on the page.
Well, I love that, because as an author myself, I know how hard it is to write, and the fact that you've integrated your visual art or love for visual art with also the ability to journal and write is very healing and transformational. And my first book was a memoir. My second book, well, I guess my first book was a guide for yoga teacher training called Sacred Space, and then I wrote a memoir. Third book's called Better Divorce Blueprint. It's a book, workbook, audiobook, and course. But in that, I also do the core value exercise, which I was just like excited that you mentioned that. But it's there's a lot of reflective points, and then I have a companion workbook. So every time in the book I ask a question, you have a place in the workbook to record your answers and work through it, because there's a lot to think about. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 are before divorce. 4, 5, and 6 are during, and 7 and 8 are after. Now I just wrote I have another project where it's called the Hysterical Adventure. 50 Ways to Leave Your Husband, The Hysterical Adventures of Delilah. I was going to name it the Hysterical Adventures of Delilah, 50 Ways to Leave Your Husband. I'm not sure which one is the title and the subtitle right now, but the book is written. Interesting how editors always have an opinion about title versus subtitle. But I've taken these 50 stories of clients, no names or anything, but they've kind of taken little vignettes of funny stories of like these relationships that like were not meant to be, and turned it into this little synopsis of Delilah's dating history. So it's going to be a fun little story. I think it's actually more of a screenplay than I think it is a book, but I have to write the book first. So, and my next one is taking the 150 Psalms and turning that into a journal, where on the left page is a quote from the Psalm, not the whole from the Old Testament, just from the Psalm portion of it, a quote from it. and then a reflective piece, and then on the the right side, where they have a place to do that reflection. So I wanted to integrate
Beautiful.
my faith with that. So I love writing, and anytime I talk to an author, I get super excited with, writing and creating, and of course, being a creator myself, it's sort of my outlet when I'm not teaching yoga and dance and doing it in a different way. And it sounds wonderful, and a great tool for so many to have that 100 days. And I also love how it doesn't have to be 100 consecutive days, and neither does that. An emotional map isn't linear. It doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3, 4. It can, like I say, sometimes we have to take 2 steps forward and a step back, or a step forward and 2 steps back. We revolve from that reality check, a reframe, a rebuild step, and then a reflective point. So it's interesting. So I love this conversation. Tell me and everyone listening, what's the best way to learn more about you and your story and your work, and dare I say, follow you. It sounds very stalky, but learn more about the work you do and your services.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this has been so much fun, Paulette. So I am very active on LinkedIn. So I would encourage anyone who's interested to connect around coaching and life design to please connect with me there. I am also active on Instagram. Both of them are just at Ashley Jablow. And then if you're curious to learn more about tools and resources like the 100 Days of Designing My Life journals, you can go to lifedesignschool.co, that's .co, and there's all sorts of information there about my journals, my new card deck, coaching, on-demand workshops, all sorts of things to support you.
Perfect. And everyone, I hope this has been a fun conversation, inspiring conversation, a good walk down memory lane for you, as it has been Ashley and myself, about what in your life is working, what maybe in your life needs to be readdressed, reevaluated, and reflected on, so that you can create that life you deserve, because you do. And if anyone tells you otherwise, maybe you should reevaluate the relationship. So with no further ado, please look up Ashley's work and learn more about her. Get that journal. We all need it. And until next time, make it better. That's how we have to roll. See you soon. There we go.